Starting now. Hey, I am Allie, and I'm going to be talking about backend web development in Clicks with the AWS Amplify Admin UI. And I am a senior developer advocate on the product team for Amplify. So I get to work with this tool all day, every day, and I feel very lucky to be able to do so. So our goals for this talk are to build a fun application. You'll learn a lot about Amplify and discuss some underlying services that go on behind the hood in Amplify. So we'll create some data, we'll model a backend schema, then we'll test it out locally, and you don't need to have an AWS account for this step, which I think is really nice for people just getting started off with this ecosystem. Then we will deploy to AWS. Finally, we will manage with the admin UI so that you can edit your data without having to create your own forms. We'll also extend this using the Amplify CLI or command line interface. So Amplify is a set of AWS tools that is specifically targeted to front-end and mobile developers. There's a lot of AWS services out there, and behind the scenes, they all power this, but it makes it a little bit easier for somebody like me who works mostly in JavaScript to be able to use those services without having to know a ton about the cloud. We started out with a command line interface, and now we also have a visual interface called the admin UI. We'll use those, and these allow you to provision these services and connect them to your front ends. And it's pretty developer friendly, if I do say so myself. And so I like to think of the web as evolving. So first, the web became no longer static. There was the PHP and Cold Fusion, which added dynamic data to apps. And then we added in frameworks for easier development. So things like Ruby on Rails and Django. And these are what I used for the first few years of my career pretty heavily. And Ruby on Rails did this amazing demo of building a blog in 15 minutes. And there was all this code generation, scaffolding that went on behind the scenes with that. And now things have evolved a little bit, and we moved away from that to an extent with the React and the API backend era that I think we're in now. And then there's also the serverless era as well. It's allowing for easier deployment because managing all of the infrastructure is a job in and of itself. So you don't need to battle with all that server stuff. And so this Amplify, I think, combines a lot of the good parts of this, of the frameworks for easier development and also serverless for easier deployment, as well as code generation, which will make it so that you have to write less code and you can focus on the business logic. So I think low-code development is something that I'm really, really excited about. I think it's scary, though, for a lot of developers because it's like, is my job going to go away? And my answer to that is no, that we're always going to be developing these tools that go into this, and that right now we're at a point where we still need to be developer first when we do low code. So there needs to be a way for developers to extend and modify this code as a first class feature. So I think that that's where we should be with low code right now. If you're trying to build something that's fully scalable and a full application instead of something that's not going to evolve over time. So we've already seen this with things like Ruby on Rails, where you run one command and it generates a lot of the code for you. And I see this as something that we should, in a way, go back to, because with React, you can't really do that. And so really excited to see what we can do in the future with having a starting place so that we can focus on the hard things as developers, the unsolved problems, rather than the problems that have been solved over and over and over again. So I think there's a lot of power in this because the code is very expensive. Hiring developers is expensive, and there needs to be a lot of maintenance and bug fixing and things like that that goes on in order to have a fully custom web app. And I think that's going to continue for the near future. But You also need to have customizability. You have to have good developer experience because those are going to make it so that you can keep building and keep scaling, and developers are actually going to want to work on their product. So we want to empower developers to do more with less code and to be able to develop in the easiest way possible. So I think this power is in this developer first low code that's almost the extension of the triumphs of the framework and serverless eras of development, combining those to make something even more awesome. And so we want to empower developers to do more with less code and to be able to develop in the easiest way possible. So again, that you can focus on your individual business use cases instead of reinventing the wheel. And this admin UI that I'm going to show you isn't just like a flimsy toy for building demos. It's packed by the power of AWS under the hood. It's using the same technologies that a bunch of other companies are using. So I'm going to be showing you a lot of demo code, but I did everything via videos because the demo gremlins always come out and I don't want to bore you with that. So if you want to follow along, the link for this admin UI that I'm going to be starting out in is sandbox.amplifyapp.com. And you can head there again without having an AWS account. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create our data. We're going to create a database schema visually. So here, this is what you get to if you go to that sandbox.amplifyapp.com, then click Get Started, and then choose the data, and then you can choose Blake schema. You can also start with one of the other ones as well, and then you can add in your models. So I'm going to create one that's course, and I'll have a title for each course and a description. So we're going to create a video course platform similar to like a Coursera or something like that, where there's a course with videos in there. So we have title, description, order, and you can also change the data types as well. So if you want an integer, you can change to that. And if you hover on any of the fields, you can either make them required or an array field or both. So that is what I'm doing right here. Then I'm going to add a relationship between the models. So I'm going to have a course that has many videos associated with them. And I always rename the relationship to be lowercase instead of uppercase, but you don't necessarily need to. And then it's going to ask you what type of app you're building. And so there's iOS, web, Android, and then you can choose between the different frameworks and languages. So I'm going to choose React, but that's because I'm a React developer, and judging by the fact that you're at this conference, you probably are too. So I'm going to create a React app. Another example of a really cool tool that generates a lot of code for you. I'm going to change into the directory. You need to install the Amplify command line interface. I already have that because I work on this. And then I'm going to run Amplify pull, and this will pull my front end into, or the inverse, it'll pull my back end into my front end. So this is going to take a couple minutes, and I'm going to install the AWS Amplify libraries as well as TypeScript. And that is because behind the scenes, this generates TypeScript models that go along with the schema that you created. So I'm also going to need to configure Amplify for my app. And you'll see that code was generated, like I was saying. So you have this backend folder that has all these different files within it. And you also have this AWS exports file that will be populated once we deploy our app. So you can see that TypeScript models were generated as well. So we've got video and course with all the fields that we declared. So this makes it so you can use IntelliSense and all those things. And also behind that, there's GraphQL. So your GraphQL models are generated here as well. And if you're comfortable with GraphQL, you can actually update those and push to Amplify. So now I have a React app. It's just spinning, but if you use Create React App, that's what it gives you by default. So again, all that I did so far is I created my backend schema or the different models that I want to have for my app. I created some fields on there as well. Then I pulled that down. I installed some things locally, and Amplify generated some code for me. The other thing worth saying is that if at any point you need to update your data, you can go back to the model tab, change that data, and then run Amplify pull again in order to get that data locally. So what's going on behind the scenes here is first that there's Amplified Data Store, which is a set, or it's a library that's going to allow you to have offline online data. So the data is first going to be stored in IndexedDB in your browser, and it's also going to be synced to your application database once you deploy this. So right now it's just local, it's just IndexedDB. Once we deploy, with no extra logic on your end, it's also going to sync that data to the cloud. So this is really helpful for a lot of use cases. When I was a software engineer, this was something that we had to implement a lot. For example, I used to work at Dev2, and if you notice that there's the editor, if you go offline or navigate away from the page, it automatically saves your blog post for you. And this is really helpful because you don't want to put all this time into a blog post and then have it delete itself. So I implemented that feature. It's just one example of something that you may want to do both offline and online, and something that especially mobile developers have to do all the time. So behind that is Amazon or AWS Appsync, which is a GraphQL API service. So behind the scenes, there is GraphQL models, and you can interact with those if you need to. Then DynamoDB, which is a serverless key value and document database that's highly scalable. So you don't need to know any of these services directly, but this is what Amplify is interfacing with under the hood. And you can extend these services. Like if you wanted to move out of Amplify, you could still use your DynamoDB database that you generated through Amplify. These services still exist. They're the full-blown thing. They're not just half versions of them or anything like that. So let's move on to step 2, which is test in your app. And again, I still am not doing this in the cloud. It's just local at this point. So I had this React app. I'm going to clean it up. I'm sure that if you've used Create React app before, you've done this as well, where you need to strip some stuff when you start out. I'm going to create a button, and it's going to add a course on click. So I'm going to add this add course function here, and then I'm going to add this code here. So I call this copy and paste driven development, where it actually generates your code for you. And so you can copy and paste that generated code and put it in your own files. So this is the code in order to create a new course. So I'm importing the model, and then I am going to update this so that I am doing a window.prompt to get the title and description, because writing forms is not fun. So data store is going to save this new course that I'm creating. And again, I can copy and paste that code. So the name will be a React course and have a great description as well. So now I want to make it so that I'm pulling the data whenever the page loads. So I'm going to add in a use effect. So inside of this use effect, I'm going to create a pull data function, just because the callback to use effect cannot be asynchronous itself. So I do this hack of creating an asynchronous function within there that I call. And then I am going to go back to my copy and paste driven development and take this query here. So this is my query in order to get all my courses. And you can see that now those are console logging when I go to the page. Now I'm going to add a second course. Refresh, and you can see that now I have 2 models. So again, I do not need an AWS account for anything that I'm doing. If you just wanted to store your data locally, you can use data store and these models without syncing it to the cloud or anything like that. There's no chance of racking up AWS charges or anything like that in this point. But usually you're going to want to actually send this to developers and have the data be available across users. So you would want to deploy the database somewhere. So that's what we're going to do next, is deploy it to AWS. So now on this same page that I got my code snippets from, I'm going to go to the deploy tab. That was just showing that you can go back to the model tab at any point and update your data. So I'm going to go to deploy, and then you can either create an AWS account or use one that you already have. I already have one, thankfully. So I will go ahead and sign into my account. And then you're going to name your application. So I'll do video course, and then you want to choose AWS region. So I'm doing US East 1. You essentially just want to pick the one that's closest to your users. And then that's going to take a few minutes to deploy. Once it does, you can open up this admin UI. And now this is actually the deployed version of this. So it's out in the cloud instead of just being on your local machine. You can go see your models that you created. You can also use these forms in order to create courses and videos. So if I click create course, I can add in a title right here. I'll do a complete beginner guide to React. Shameless plug for my real content that I have out there. That's one of my favorite content pieces I've written. And then there's a markdown editor for writing in your description. So if you want to do a markdown preview, it's on the right hand side there. So then you can save. You can also link to videos directly within that form. As a software engineer, a thing that I had to do all the time was create one app and then create a second app for the actual company themselves to use to moderate the data. This kind of does that for you. So then you're going to run Amplify pull again with this new data. So it follows a Git-like model of Amplify push to deploy things into the cloud, Amplify pull to pull those changes locally. And there's always that local setup instructions widget up at the top there, and you can click that to get that code generation and also to get the Amplify pull command for your own app. The other thing with this is that the URL is actually outside of the AWS ecosystem, so you can invite users via email instead of through their AWS account if you want. So say I have a developer on my app, I can give them full access to update the data model and all that themselves. But also say I have a non-technical user, like a content manager, that I want to give access to this, but I don't want them to be able to change the data model. I can also give them partial access to just update the data. So those are some options there. Okay, so the next step is to manage your data. So I'm going to actually add authentication in this step. So now we're going to have an app with both data and auth. So if you click the enable authentication button right here, it'll allow you to add AWS Cognito powered authentication to your app. So there's different login mechanisms here. You can do like email, sign in with Apple, all those types of things. You can also do multi-factor if you want, and you can change different attributes that you have to get from your user, as well as the security of the password that you're making them use. So then you press save and deploy in order to deploy this locally, or you run Amplify pull again. And then I'm going to install the Amplify React components. These are going to allow me to directly use components within React. So with Authenticator as a higher order component, I'm going to import that. And then I'm going to use the component. And what this is going to do is give me a full authentication system. So it's going to make you create a new account. I'm not going to do that because I don't want you all to see my phone number, but you can go in and create a new one. You can also go into the admin UI and create users through that. So I'm going to create a user with my email address, create a temporary password for that user, and it will email them as well. You can also create user groups. So for example, if you wanted to have an admin group, you can create that. And then I can add myself to the admin group. Then you can go back to your data models and add authorization rules to them so that the admins can perform different actions. So you can add multiple authorization rules to different pieces of data. So for example, here I can make it so an admin can perform full CRUD, but maybe an unsigned in user can only read data or something along those lines. So that's what I'm doing right here. Then save and deploy once you update your data, and then Amplify pull again. So this is using Amazon Cognito for user sign up and sign in. And it is here being used for web and mobile apps. It's all being done behind the scenes, so you don't need to know too much about that, but just want to plug that that's the service being used here. So then you can extend all this with the Amplify command line interface. So the admin interface that we have that interacts with the other AWS services, that still works. It's forwards and backwards compatible, so I can start in the admin UI or the command line interface and use them interchangeably. But I know that a lot of developers want to work in their own development environment. And so you can do everything through the command line interface as well. And this is where you can add the really custom options as well. And there's more options too. So you could add static file storage for things like pictures. You could do functions to have Lambda functions. You could do REST API through API Gateway. So there's lots of power. There's even AI ML. I've been enjoying playing around with that recently. So if you're more comfortable just in the command line, you can do it that way as well. But if you like this point and click visual interface, you can do it that way. So I'm going to show you how to add the S3 functionality to your app. So I updated this app a little bit to make it so that all of the courses are listed on the page and I can add new courses. So I'm going to create a new file that will allow me to create a video. So this video form file. And then I'm going to import it into here so that I loop through all my courses. And for each course, I can add a new video to that course. I'm going to send the course ID as a prop here so that I can send it when I'm creating a new video and say this video belongs to this course. So I'm going to create some inputs here. Emmet for the win. If you're not already using Emmet, you definitely should be. I'm going to make them all text to start out with, but the second to last one will be a number. That'll be the order of the video, and then the file, which will be the video file itself. So movies and MP4s will be accepted by that. And then I'll import use state from React. I'll need to set up some state fields. And of course, in real life, you'd want to have labels and things like that. So I'm going to do my title, my description, my order. So this is going to be the order that the video plays in. And then the video file itself. So then I'm going to make it so that when the form fields change, then my state fields change as well. If you've been writing React for a while, you've probably implemented this exact pattern a bajillion times. I know that I have. So this one, again, it's going to be the order. I'm going to change that into an integer though. And then finally, this last one, I'm going to set the video file and I'm going to get the video file itself from that. And then I'm going to need to add an onSubmit function here and a submit button, which I forgot the first time. So now this handle submit function, I need to make it asynchronous. I'm performing asynchronous actions with it. And then I'm going to go back into this copy and paste driven development, copy in the code to create a new video and paste this in. So it initially gives me this lorem ipsum text. I'm going to clear that out and use the values from my form instead. And then I'll pull the course ID from my props because I'm passing that course ID in from my parent component. So the next thing that I need to do is in the command line, enable storage. So Amplify add storage, and then I'm going to choose content, and I'm going to give the name for my S3 bucket, and then give different permissions to different types of users. For the sake of the demo, I'll give everybody access to everything, but you should give the least amount of access to people as possible. I'm going to push this to the cloud. I'm going to import the storage object from Amplify. Then I'm going to upload my video file whenever I create a new video. So I'll do storage.put, and I need to a key for it. So I'm going to do the video.id as the key, and then the value will be the video file itself. And I also always forget the e.prevent default, so I'll need to fill that back in as well. And so now I need to make it so that my videos show on the page. So I'll import storage from AWS Amplify and then my video as well. And then here, what I'll do is I'll query to get my video. For now, I'll just do one, but you could also loop through all of them and render them on the page. I'll set my video with the information from that video query. I'll just do the first one again, and then I will query Amazon S3 or my storage for that video file. So again, I saved it under the video queries or the videos ID. So I'm going to use that ID for this. So I'll do the video file, and then I will save that to state. And now I need to render it on the page. So I'll use a video element. I'll do video file as the source. I'll have the controls on there as well. And there I am. This is one of my YouTube videos that I have embedded on the page. So now I'm storing my own videos instead of needing to store like a link to one somewhere else on the internet. So there's so much more that you can do with this. And if you are interested, the best place to learn more is the docs.amplify.aws. I am a Spittel everywhere. I also want to plug that if you want to work on this, you can. We are hiring. So thank you so much for listening to me talk. This was a ton of fun.